So welcome everyone to one of our first webinar format for our Share and Learn session. My name is Debbie Forster. I am the CEO of the Tech Talent Charter. I really appreciate you joining us today. I know there's a million things in your inbox, probably 2 million things that you need to do on your list of to-do things, and you have busy meetings before and after. What we want to achieve on this session is you're going to join a conversation with us. And in that conversation, you're going to hear from companies and from research on what is working, what is not working. But our goal in all of this is to give you practical, actionable insights. Now, if you signed up for this session, you already get that inclusion and diversity matters. You already know that the world of hybrid working is upon us. What you really want to do is to be able to get these insights, to think about how do you ask the right questions, consider the right issues, get the right practical steps to get your company where you need to be. So we're going to be joined by two guests. What we want to do is to make this a conversation. So there is a question session, there's a chat session. Do feel free to put those questions in. I have Karen from my team who will keep her eagle eye on that and make sure that we know that different questions are coming in. We'd love for you to share your questions, but if you have observations to build on, to add on, what I've promised to the others on the panel is that they go away with something that they may not have thought of or learned of before. So we hope to make this actionable for you. So let's set the context. Back when we were starting in 2017, to talk to companies about flexible working seemed edgy, seemed really risky for companies to consider. And there was a lot of mythologizing around, we can't possibly do that as a tech team. We can't possibly do that and maintain our efficiency, keep our team spirit, build that culture that we wanted to do. And then COVID came along, and COVID exploded those myths, and so many companies had to find out, what does remote working mean? Because people's schedules were exploded. They had to explore, what does flexible working mean? Can part-time work? That was great, and some real strides were made. And the world is getting back to normal, whatever that means. And so we're having to explore this new world of hybrid working, which is neither just one thing nor another. And so that throws up opportunities, risks, confusions. So today in the talk, what we want to do is to explore, how can you make this work? And how can you make sure that this assists and reinforces your current work in terms of inclusive cultures, diverse teams, etc.? None of this happens by accident. Now, no one on my call says they have the answers, but they're happy to share what's on the journey. And I'd like you to do so too. So I'm really happy. I'm going to let my team, my panel, introduce themselves to you. We have people who are working in organizations who have been researching and working with companies in this topic before anybody was talking about it. And we're joined by a company who was working in this space, thinking in this way, long before a lot of companies were. So now it's my panel. I get to say to you and introduce yourselves. I will call on you each by name. Can you just introduce who you are, your title, where you're from? Rachel, do you want to kick that off for me?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Debbie. So my name is Rachel Palmley, and I'm lead principal consultant from an organisation called Timewise, and we're a flexible working consultancy with a mission to enable everyone to access the flexibility they need whilst maximising their value in the workplace. And we've obviously been doing an enormous amount of work around hybrid, supporting organisations to develop their hybrid approach, but also really importantly to implement it really effectively. It's a real pleasure to be here today.
And we've loved working with you since those early days. And whenever people would say, what's possible, what can we do? We would send them your direction. So thank you, Rachel. And we'll want to talk about your report in a moment. Robert and Anne, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Okay, let me go first. Robert McLean at PwC. I lead the real estate and design team. So that's the internal team for PwC. Looking at all of our own sort of workspace and property requirements. So we've got 20 or so locations in the UK, differing sizes and perhaps some different challenges. But what we've been on really over the last sort of probably 10 years is a whole sort of direction of travel is in terms of creating greater agility to our workspace. So actually, I think when hybrids come along, actually it's new terminology and it's something different for us to think about. But I actually think it's it's really just building on a lot of the flexibility that we've been trying to plan into our portfolio in previous years.
Fantastic. And you're reaping the benefits for that, aren't you?
I believe so.
And then Anne, you linked up in that discussion. Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yes, so Anna Groves. I've managed to spell my own name wrong coming into Zoom. So it's Anna, not Anne. Normally it's someone else that gets your spelling wrong, isn't it? But completely my fault today. I work, well, I've done two things at PwC. One, spent a lot of time doing client-facing work around people and change. So have a client-facing hat on, and what I do now is work internally for our organisational effectiveness team. And essentially we try and make sure that the people in the organisation work as effectively as possible, that we can serve our clients in the best possible way, and that we support the inclusion and diversity agenda very closely with the team who focus on that. We look after, Debbie, go on,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just one more thing to say. So I look after what is our employee value proposition, and that's the deal. So Rob and I would touch on elements of that, but essentially there are four main elements to that. There's how you're empowered, which goes hand in hand with the hybrid and the flexibility agenda, how you grow, how you make a difference, and how you're valued. So trying to bring all of those things together across the firm.
Fantastic. And I think, you know, we've worked with you at PwC since the very earliest days. You've been sponsors with us. PwC is on our principal partner board. And, you know, we have enjoyed, because when there was that early myth busting of flexible working doesn't work, as PwC, you were always bastions of us being able to say, this is something that works, and it works in companies. All right, so let's get kicked off. Rachel, Timewise, as I said you've been in this space for some time, but the world has changed. You had a great report that you've published, and if anyone on the call hasn't read it, we'll share a link with you after this, and I highly recommend it as required reading. But Rachel, can you talk me through some of the main insights for this, and in particular, thinking ahead and building on from COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think I'll start with our motivation for doing the research in the first place, which was exactly as you said, Debbie. We've been working in this flexible working space for 17 years. But, you know, through the pandemic, we've never seen the dial shift so much, particularly around place-based flexibility. And, you know, it's absolutely fundamentally changed the way that we think about home and the way that we think about the office. And for many, you know, hybrid working has been their first taste of flexibility in the workplace. So it's been a huge change. But, you know, throughout the pandemic, and when we were working with organisations to sort of develop their approach, their principles, their framework, whatever you call it, it was all very hypothetical, wasn't it? You know, organisations were kind of bunny hopping back and forward between kind of being fully remote, being kind of trying to get back into the office for a bit, and then everyone was back home again. And so it was only really this year that organisations, businesses were actually putting their hybrid approach properly into practice. And so we wanted to understand what those early experiences were for businesses, you know, what they were learning, what approaches they'd taken, and really importantly, as you said, Debbie, what was next for them? What were their kind of key concerns and the things that they were kind of looking to do next? So we spoke to 14 different organisations from a range of different sectors and sizes. And, you know, today I can talk obviously about that research, but also about the ongoing work that we do with a variety of clients to support them in embedding their hybrid working. So I think to start with, there were some really key messages coming through from the research. And if we start with the benefits, and of course, I think probably people are fairly sort of up to speed on this already, but, you know, there was a lot of consistency around feeling that actually productivity had been positively impacted, or at least had not been detrimentally impacted, which, you know, we talk about those myths, Debbie, prior to the pandemic. I think, you know, the mindset would probably have been very different. For many organisations, they were able to start thinking about reducing the cost potentially of their real estate portfolio.
Yes.
Thinking about, you know, they'd seen improvements in terms of employee well-being and engagement. And, you know, they were starting to realise the benefits that hybrid might offer from a fairness and inclusion and diversity perspective as well. But of course, you know, all of these things potentially are a double-edged sword, aren't they? And I think really, particularly when you think about well-being and when you think about fairness and inclusion, because of course, you know, from a well-being perspective, we know that, you know, yes, hybrid enables people to integrate their work and their life perhaps in a way that they weren't able to do before, but equally we know that it can lead to long hours, it can lead to that blurring of lines, can't it, between where does work stop and life start? And in terms of fairness and inclusion, you know, there are obvious risks with hybrid. There's been a lot in the media, hasn't there, about visibility and opportunity and what comes with that, in terms of people who are perhaps working more remotely feeling a bit overlooked when it comes to opportunities for progression or promotion, or just having good work allocated to them. And also tribes can emerge in the office, and you know, the organisations we were talking to were starting to see this kind of in-group of, you know, in the office, and a kind of same groups, you know, evolving remotely as well. And if you add to that the sort of manager lottery, in terms of if you've got if you're lucky enough to have a manager who's really supportive of hybrid working, your experience is likely to be very different to teams where perhaps you've got a more traditional manager who really doesn't think it works and wants everyone kind of back to old ways of working. So it's a real delicate balance of pros and cons, and that was what we were hearing from the organisations we were talking to. But you know, people want it, people expect it. It's almost become a hygiene factor in terms of, you know, when people are looking for work, and so it's absolutely critical that businesses get this stuff right.
So let me interject there just for a moment,
sure.
Rachel, because I think we say, and probably I'm assuming on this call, most everyone knows these things, but it is important when we're putting together that case to get real buy-in and C-suite. And I'll come to you about how you needed to look at that at PwC. Assembling that business case of now a really strong body of evidence on things like productivity, savings, engagement are very, very important. Equally, though, when we're trying to think strategically and as decision makers, we need to think about impact on things like culture. We need to think about that unity within the piece, that D&I promotion. We're going to unpack all of those sorts of things. Going back to this high level benefits piece and getting senior top level buy-in. Robert, Anne, are there anything you'd add to that you've been doing it longer, but you must still have to keep making that case? What other things, if I'm on the call and I want to implement in my company, what are the other things I want to throw into the mix if I'm going to get the right senior buy-in?
Anna, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, happy to. I think as a firm, we've always worked flexibly, and we've always worked in a hybrid way, and that's between client offices, our own offices, and at home. So this wasn't new to us. But I think very quickly our senior leadership came together and actually formulated their own approach to this. And I think there were some very different views. We still have some very different views. Rob and I were talking about this yesterday. We're not there yet. We're not the finished package in any way as an organisation. But I think we had some very, very healthy debates, and there was a real sense of, we've got to do this, we've got to make it work, we've got to communicate and be open and honest with our staff from the leaders. So I don't think we had to create the buy-in at the very senior level. I think there were then a very, very open lines of communication. We ran live streams all the time with people. We've continued to have a really open and healthy debate around this, and we set some pretty clear expectations from the start that we want our people to be in 40 to 60% of the time, and there is real flex with that. So there was a series of conversations that happened across the firm with individuals on a one-to-one basis. What works for you? What are your preferences? How does this work? We know that people, we are a firm where we need our people to be their best, and we're a firm that can lose out to our competitors. There are lots of other firms that do great consulting and that do the kind of work we do. So we know we have to be at the top of our game in this space. And I think, one of the fundamental concepts of the deal is that it is all based on the concept of trust, and it's two-way.
Good.
So we offer a huge amount as a firm to people, but we expect a lot in return. So we offer flexibility. We've changed the way we've done things a huge amount over the last 2 years. We introduced empowered flexibility, which gave people the flex to work how, when, and where they wanted to. But we still expect people in the office. We still expect them to deliver fantastic quality work to our clients and to do what our clients need. And I think it's that trust and that two-way relationship that has got the buy-in from people. And we're very conscious if we do anything to erode that, we could lose people.
So let me go back, and Robert, I'll see if you want to build on this. So what I'm hearing, and I think you're probably in common with a lot of companies, getting people to agree with the overall concept of hybrid working and flexible working is reasonably easy. Getting into so the why, it's the how. It's actually putting it to work that starts. And those sorts of debates are important and healthy, because we do need to get to the bottom of what is really the business need. Not what's a business convenience, but what's a business need, because that's something that has to be, there has to be flexibility on both sides, but it is cutting through. And we'll come to this management question and trust issue. If people feel that they manage and get effectiveness and impact by proximity, then you have a very difficult proposition. It is about how are we building trust and accountability in a different way. I mean, Robert, if you've heard the discussions going on, is there anything you also do? Because I want to start this at the top level, then we'll talk to people, and then we'll talk about what we're doing on managers. So when I'm getting that top level, and then Rachel, I want you to come back in. Thinking at the top level, what are the questions? What are the debates we're having? Not just the easy answers, but what are we still debating in making hybrid and flexible work?
I think I mean, hybrid has just become part of everyday language now, hasn't it? Whereas it really wasn't a couple of years ago. And but I think even though, and that's the terminology the industry is landing on. I think for me though, it is really actually okay. But we were always kind of talking about flexibility and empowering people and trust and flexible working, that sort of thing. So for me, this is an acceleration of that, and that's what's come out of the pandemic. For me, one of the shifts that's happened is actually people's attitude maybe to the office, and it is actually how the business views the office, and maybe the value that the office can now provide, whereas previously, you kind of think, okay, it's about accommodating people, isn't it? And it's maybe seen quite almost negatively as an overhead or a liability. Whereas once you turn it around and you see the office as a positive and as an asset, and you think actually it's really now providing something that people don't get at home, or it's bringing people together in a way that you can't do sort of outside of the office. And I like to think when our offices are working at their absolute best, and when they're designed and planned and functioning really at their absolute best, they really are contributing to that culture piece, because that's the kind of intangible piece. And it's so all of a sudden the value of the office just magnifies, because it's no longer this overhead. It's actually, no, hang on, this is the thing that draws people together. Our challenge is trying to rethink or reimagine, okay, but what does that mean in terms of the environment within this office then? Because we are getting lots of requests in terms of new ways of working, and therefore we need collaboration, we need social space, we need all of these new things, let's say. But at the same time, we're also getting people saying, no, I want to come into the office, I want to focus, I want my workspace, I want monitors, we've got monitors everywhere, sort of thing. And so I think the expectations of the office are increasing. So therefore, what we really need to do is, when we're investing in that workspace, is make sure we are really clear what we are looking to deliver.
Super. And I think it was very powerful when you talk about how PwC has approached it, in that you have those three pillars. Now we have two of the pillars here, in looking at what's happening with facilities and real estate, what's happening for people, what's happening with technology. But where I have found the most exciting piece is when companies are putting to side the old assumptions that somehow the building and your cubicle are somehow part of your culture, and that's why people come to work with you. But now you're competing with comfortable home spaces with a commute on top. But this reinvention where companies are getting it right, I'm hearing people say something about, oh, I'm quite excited because I'm in the office next week. I never heard that pre-pandemic. Okay, I won't break this to who companies and who's been telling me this, but when you can rethink this, and being in the office has purpose, being in the office is equipped and adds to my experience of work and makes me more effective, more impactful, it gets interesting. Rachel, is there anything else when we're talking about these senior high level discussions that we want to think about that we should add to?
I think that cultural piece is massive. And, going back to the research, it was one of the key kind of what's next for people. It was that, how do we encourage people back in? How do we really understand what value the office has for people? And I think, from a leadership perspective, there is a bit of rethinking around culture to be done, isn't there? Because, culture is evolving constantly, and, and changing ways of working forces potentially some uncomfortable questions about, what is our culture now? What do we want it to be? How is it different to how it was before? And some of the organisations we've been working with are, you know, proactively obviously engaging with their people, but also really proactively speaking to new recruits who perhaps have only joined since, you know, it's been a kind of disparate or, you know, a hybrid way of working, to really understand what do they value, what do they feel the culture is within the organisation.
And it is unpacking, because I do think there was not a conscious, but there was an unconscious equation in people's minds. If we give them pizza, beer, and a ping pong table, they're going to love us, they're going to work for us, and our culture is going to be great. Where when you realize, people are realizing that they can get better pizza, nicer beer, and don't really want to play ping pong, but they'll still come in the office for something different. So it's going down to something much more basic, much more interesting, rather than the transactional. I give you breakfast cereal and you give me your buy-in. So I think one of the things, and it'll be interesting if anyone wants to add to that in questions later, but to me, what I'm hearing, an essential piece as you're rethinking those things, is that definition of culture, and that culture that has to include, if you're going to make hybrid work, that trust and accountability. All right. And trust is not blind trust. This is business, but it is accountability and trust that isn't, because I did hear of some horror stories under lockdown where people were being asked by managers to keep their camera on, or tools that would measure how long between keystrokes on computers. So that's not a way of getting the buy-in of the culture, but the trust, the culture. I'm also hearing, and let's look into this now, and you know, you might want to talk to us about this, some of those debates on what does the business need, what do people need, because I think there is also this one size fits all, or the free for all. We're just going to say to everybody, do what suits you, and I'm sure it's going to come good. Or you get these very regimented, we're going to do hybrid working, it's flexible, but everyone's going to be in Monday to Thursday from 9 to 5. You know, that's not the counterpoint. So let's hear from all of you. If I am going to lean into that, how do I start shaping hybrid working in a way that works for the business and works for our people? And I know you did some work and got some data from people post-COVID. Do you want to talk me through that?
Yeah, and I guess we've got that extra dimension that I mentioned before. So we've got something that works for our business, we've got something that works for the people in it, and we've got something that works for our clients. And we are a client-facing business. So, you know, Rob and I were talking about this again yesterday. There are people who are back on site with clients 5 days a week. If that's what our clients want, and if that's what they want, then we will deliver that. We will just make sure internally that we are, you know, we're understanding the people's preferences who are on the ground and who are in those teams, and that next time we put them onto a project, we try and make sure that it's more aligned to, you know, something different if that's what they want. So that there is an additional piece for us. But we know everybody is different, and the point in the deal is it can be personalized to suit whatever, you know, whatever needs, whatever preferences you have. And there are so many things that we offer as a firm. We launched summer working hours last year, so we give people the opportunity to have Friday afternoons off if they work their hours over the rest of the week. We launched a new international remote working policy where people can apply to work a period of time abroad. Not everybody wants to do that, but we know they're all different. And Debbie, to your point, at the start of the pandemic, we launched a Future of Work survey, and we asked people, you know, it was a completely new agenda for us. We didn't know what our people wanted. We could make some assumptions, but we went out and we asked people, and I think something like 15,000 people responded.
Wow.
So
wow,
3/4 of the organization to say, here are the number of days that I want to be back in the office. Here's the kind of, you know, the kind of lifestyle I want. Here's how the pandemic's feeling for me. And we know that that will continue to evolve. So what we heard a year and a half, 2 years ago is going to be different to what people want now. And we're sending out another survey in the next month or two to ask people about their preferences again and to understand what they want going forward. We've got a group called the People Council, who are our kind of representatives across the firm, all different grades, all different lines of service and business units. And we're going to them next week, actually, with a similar question. You know, what would make the biggest difference to you in terms of how we continue to evolve the deal, and how we make hybrid working work. So
And that's
continue to
really
listen.
important, because it keeps moving, doesn't it? As a cohort and individually. But one thing I would say in terms of the power of that, how many initiatives do we know in our companies in which we put out a voluntary survey that we have a 75% response? So this says whatever their answer, people are deeply invested in this kind of question, and having that voice is very powerful. But and I like that you're also looking at, not everybody wants the same thing. I think there's really important things in terms of inclusion to understand that some people don't want to work at home. Some people don't have the facilities, the capability to work from home. I know one mother who says, for her, it's very important for her work-life balance that she goes into work and then knows when she turns off her computer to go pick up her kids, she's done. Otherwise, she turns out like a lot of us do. You just keep sort of the magnetic screen where you find yourself back working in that sort of piece. So, from that survey and getting feedback from people, were there any insights that, Robert, you started thinking and building into the what happened within real estate?
I think you get an insight, don't you, from a survey like that in terms of people's almost personal circumstances, as you've said, because we've got 25,000 people in PwC, and everyone's got a different take on the deal, sort of thing, which is actually the hybrid working, and so therefore the office has really got to try and accommodate a whole such a raft of different requirements and different generations, which is something for us as well. I guess that when I kind of look at our real estate now, and particularly of some of our big buildings and our floors, I kind of ask myself the question: is the workspace there assisting, say, the business units in the way it's laid out and the way it's configured, or is it actually hindering them in some way? And is it, if it's too rigid, does that mean actually people are being kind of forced to work in a certain way? Whereas what we know is we've got people coming into the office for a raft of different reasons and needs, and they have, as much as they have the choice as to where they work throughout the week, they have the choice in terms of when they come in the buildings as to where they choose to work. So where I'm trying to, I guess, go on this is actually thinking, well, how can we get something working for the individual, the sort of individual business units, but then the organisation as a whole? And for me, it's the whole piece about actually just whatever we do, we need to be thinking about, whenever we make investments, they need to be around kind of, are we investing in flexibility? Are we on this path to this more agile workspace? And when I talk about an agile workspace, it's about the different types of spaces that we're creating to accommodate different needs. It's also about the unpredictable and the fluctuating occupancy levels we get now.
Yes.
So most big organizations at the moment see their buildings occupied 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesdays and Thursdays, but from a real estate perspective, we pay rent for 7 days a week. So, we've got this big curve, and on Tuesday, middle of the week, Mondays and Fridays is probably half that occupancy. We've got to think more, maybe imaginatively now, in terms of how do we operate those buildings maybe in a more fluid way, and that's something we begin to look at in terms of, it's not about us kind of taking things away from people. It's trying to rethink and what are the amenities and the spaces that people need now when they come into the office, but also from a corporate real estate perspective, how do we demonstrate we're a responsible occupier of space, and we are, you're not flooding it with heating and lighting and cooling if you're not really using that space.
Okay. So I want to start then moving into even more practical things, but I'm hearing some of the action points are really understanding, bottoming out at your top level. What's the culture? How do we engender the trust and accountability? What do we understand to be our clients' needs, our business needs, our people needs, to really grapple with that how, to try and look at that really concrete asks that you can then put to work when you're thinking about your real estate, to think about your technology and those sorts of pieces. Let's pretend I have fantastic flexible space now. It's perfectly kitted out. I have a wonderful booking system so I can move people in and out. I'm giving some flexibility to teams. Now we're going to start hitting some of these things that we talked about, our managers, aren't we? All right. So talk to me now. What do I need to start thinking, doing, actioning to make sure that my middle management are ready for the challenges of, one, finding out what my team needs, What do I need as a manager? How do I balance that? And I think also on that inclusion, that growth and promotion piece, how am I avoiding proximity bias? How am I avoiding that anyone who starts working from home is audience, people in the room are participants, and therefore that's the other track, what used to be the mummy track, but this is going to be the flexible working track of that's what you do. You either focus on your career or you work flexibly. So walk me through that. What can I be doing in really practical ways? If I come off this call, what am I writing down that I need to start actioning?
I think, Debbie, I mean, I would say the first thing on that to say is that managers need upskilling. You know, they need to be given the tools, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally. To some it will, and to others it will be really difficult. And I think we're expecting a lot of our middle managers in this new world of working. And so all the things you've described there, I think, you know, managers need to be given the tools and the knowledge to be able to, you know, balance the needs, you know, in the way Robert's described and it's tricky, isn't it? Balancing the needs of the organization, the needs of the team, the needs of the client, in your case at PwC, and the needs of the individual. That is a tricky balance. So, you know, that is something that needs to be taught, and they need to be supported in.
Agreed.
You know, in that, and in understanding the biases that might creep in, because they're unconscious mostly, aren't they? You know, nobody approaches this wanting to be kind of, but again, it's really important to give your managers those skills.
And it's interesting, I was reading some research the other day that when they were unpacking a lot of the Great Resignation, how much of that was middle management. Yeah. And some of the analysis saying, because who'd be a middle manager these days? Because seniors buying into things, people then want it, but then you're left with your same skills, knowledge, and experience, and you were having to completely reinvent things. How did you tackle that at PwC? What are you doing to help your middle managers be effective managers of a hybrid team?
Rob, shall I start, and then feel free to jump in? So I came off a call yesterday, actually, all around hybrid leadership and development. And Rachel, to your point, I would have said exactly the same thing to start with. I think it is around helping people understand what are the nuances in the way that they lead and the way that people interact with each other. And it is different. It's not fundamentally different to what we should have been doing before, but it is in a different context. And there is a lot more around creating psychological safety with your teams and the way in which people work, and that trust element. The behaviours are different, the way in which you can lead a meeting. So Debbie, we talked about this, you know, on the call before, but actually simple things like making sure people have, you know, if there's some people in a room and there's some people sitting at home, that everybody has their laptop so you can see their faces, introducing people out of the room first, getting them to contribute first. So you're bringing people in a way that feels more inclusive. And Rachel, you made that point at the beginning around fair work and the kind of levelling up agenda. So for us, what we saw at PwC was actually the pandemic had some really good outcomes in that sense, because our regional people who weren't based in London suddenly felt more included and more involved. And actually that is starting to shift again a bit. And you know, the people who are present and in the office, there can be a feeling that they're kind of seen first, heard first. And we are really trying to help people, you know, make sure we don't slip back to old ways around that. And Debbie, we also talked before when we spoke about, you know, the end of year process. So for us at PwC, we really tried to make clear this year, we don't want brought into the moderation discussions that we have, where people are, where they sit, where they're located, how much they're in. It's about outcome and it's about output. And frankly, it doesn't matter when, how, or where you're doing your work. It is about what benefit you bring to the client and what work do you do. And really, you know, there were some difficult discussions at that time of year. But actually, in a previous life, it might have been more about FaceTime. It absolutely isn't now, and the world has changed. But again, it's that upskilling piece and that kind of nudging and guiding managers to make sure that they're not bringing in those assumptions and those biases.
Couldn't agree more. And this goes back to companies that are already on the journey to remove that unconscious bias are ahead of the game. But it is, how are you doing the training? How are you doing transparency, accountability, surfacing data for those decisions? And I think because otherwise that proximity bias is huge. And this idea of value is not face-to-face, value is not time, value is outputs. That's a tremendous piece, but that needs to come from the top as well. That is one of those things. If we're not changing the carrots, the sticks, the levers for our middle managers, we can't expect the outcomes to change. Rachel, you're in violent agreement with
violent
me there.
agreement. Yeah. Well, it just reminds me of the leadership shadow, that sense that, as leaders, as managers, we're not just getting the message across by what we say, it's what we do, what we prioritize, what we measure. Absolutely couldn't agree more. It's so important to be role modeling this stuff, and and even really simple things like just being really open about your own ways of working, being really transparent, logging off, visibly, leaving loudly, whatever it might be. But these things are really important.
It's vitally important for them to model that. And I've seen some really interesting things where some companies are getting their managers to work from different offices and to work from home to remove that bias. Because I also I was reading a horror blog of young graduate trying to talk about how to get ahead in a company, and it was everything you don't want to hear around hybrid working. This was get a hold of your line managers, and when they're in the office, you're in the office, and you make sure. And it was just it is that kind of behavior and thinking that we have to eliminate. So that doesn't happen without intent. That doesn't happen without training and ongoing support, isn't it? And I love that you were talking, Anna. This is about what are we doing about promotion tracks, but it is also how do I run a meeting? Because you and I were talking, hybrid meetings can be an absolute nightmare. And this would come into your spot as well, Robert, on do we have the equipment to make sure that hybrid meetings don't mean several of us are at the other end of a room trying to listen to what's happening to the real meeting that's happening in 3D?
I think Anna's point in terms of we haven't cracked hybrid meetings for sure, but a simple solution to it in the short term is if you even if you're in a meeting room, you log on, and then that way you get your face the same size as everyone else is on the screen, and you can mute yourself and use the audio in the room. I guess I'll just pick up on that kind of role modeling piece and the training piece, because I see when we create working environments and we've taken a brief and we've engaged with teams and we've created what we believe is actually what the business is seeking, and then you kind of a bit puzzled why people aren't using the space. And there is some people are using it actively and kind of enjoying it, and then other groups are just not doing it and are keeping very much to their maybe more traditional space. And you think it comes down to role modeling, doesn't it, and the leadership piece and being allowed to go and use the space. It's the empowerment piece. So, and there's nothing more powerful than that, than having the managers or the partners, in case of PwC, using the space. I mean, we had a big behavioural shift when partners gave up their right to offices. And it was, for many years, it was part of the status. It was part of, this is my domain sort of thing. Now it was a big, as I say, shift when that changed. And then you see partners in the open plan, or you see rooms being used by other people but there is a training and an education part that comes to this, and I think it's not a one-off either, because we have so many new joiners coming through the business that actually, if we've come up with some workspaces which, to be honest, in some instances are quite challenging to get your head around, because we're deliberately experimenting and we're piloting different ideas, and some of it we know full well will not work, but if you don't try, you don't learn the lessons. But you need to educate people in how to use the space and how it can be used. So, and I think that's something we need to do much more of in PwC, because we are guilty in some respects of creating spaces or putting technology into spaces and then kind of doing a one-off set of training and saying, no, you get on with it, and it doesn't work.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Rachel.
I was just going to say, one of the things that I have seen work really well is, and it is a simple, practical thing, but it's, managers actually co-creating with their teams a sort of team charter, or, exploring, talking, thinking about what's the heartbeat of our team? How do we want to come together? What are the points? What are the touch points? What work is best done collaboratively? How do we use the office space? And really talking about those things as a team, so that it's, going back to that autonomy and trust piece, that it's something that is co-created But then from a leadership perspective, the importance of having a bit of a read across, you know, from the organisation, because of course, I think one of the things that many organisations have found is teams have stayed pretty well connected, but cross-team pollination is something that's been much more challenging. So finding those opportunities for people to come together.
I would just add, I think managing a hybrid team, you have to put in a lot more effort than you do if it was just an in-person team sort of thing in the office. I bring my team together on the Mondays and the Wednesdays, deliberately so, unless people are traveling around the country. The expectation is we kind of meet on those days when we're in the same office together, so you get that interaction and the ad hoc conversations. But outside of that, it's around whether it's however regular check-ins, it's team maybe I do quarterly days with my team and stuff like this, and it's about the team dynamics. It's not telling people how to do their jobs because they're very competent at that. It's just actually making sure the team is ticking over and is as effective as possible. But it does take time, and it certainly takes effort.
And so, and what I'm hearing, what I like that you said at the start of that, Robert, is we need to move away, and particularly for corporates, for large corporates, that sense of there is one perfect solution and we shall roll it down and we shall be done and we shall move on. This ongoing spirit of experimentation that everyone knows we're going to try X, and X may fly, X may crash. We learn, we roll on. I like the idea of, empowering, supporting managers to come up with these team level, as you were saying, Rachel, these individual team ways of doing, but then it's that read across and sharing across so that, Robert, you might be doing something that Anna says, super idea, we're going to try that with my team. But it is thinking about perhaps those horizontal joins across the organization, that cross pollination and creating, those magic tea kettle moments of that innovation and the earwigging information thing that can happen. So we had some absolutely
just to add to that, actually thinking Rob's point about getting the team together and the team charter. I think I mentioned we spent a lot of time a year or so ago encouraging career coaches and managers to have direct one-to-one conversations with their people. And when we did our engagement survey, there was a direct correlation between people who had had a conversation about their own ways of working and their own preferences with their engagement. It was absolutely huge. And it's almost taking it from, we have the client lens and the contracting and the discussions with their clients about what they want. We have the team level and the charters that people are creating, and then there's one-to-one conversations. What matters to me, and back to the point on the 15,000 people filling out the survey, this really matters to people. And if your manager or your career coach shows they care about that, and they build it into your team charters and your ways of working with clients, then it's so much more powerful.
It's so much more powerful, and it builds so much more of a cohesive culture than pizza and ping pong ever could, isn't it, really, those conversations? So we've had, anyone in the audience, if you want to throw in questions, we've had some questions thrown in. Let me throw a few to you as my panel. Right. What are the questions we should be asking ourselves to challenge the status quo? How are we bedding these policies in for the long term? Does anyone want to take that one?
I think I would, for me, whatever we do from a property perspective, or what I've said, and there's lots of different components, but the most important thing is understanding what the business brief is, and actually what is that sort of the aspirations of the business, and if you've got clarity around that aspiration, and then maybe what that vision is, and then you translate that into a brief or a strategy, things fall out of it much more clearly, because people have got clarity and direction. And from a design perspective, the clearer we can be in terms of capturing what the business requirements are, the easier things fall through. If you start off with a vague or woolly brief, you don't be surprised if you end up with something which is not ticking all the marks later on, sort of thing. It's really that clarity piece. So I would say it's in terms of for the leadership of the business to be explain what are they seeking, and it will be something different for each organization.
Absolutely. Anyone want to add to that before I throw into another?
I would echo it. And also, so thinking about what the main drivers are, what would success look like? How will you measure success? That's a really important one. And also, what culture are you looking to create and what is your culture currently, and you know, do you know? And I think that's a really key question.
I think it is that element of laying out at regular elements, all at regular intervals, all those assumptions, and really kicking the tires of, is that true now? Yes, that is something we would have said makes sense, and that was our culture then. This is what our clients want. This is what success look like. But always interrogating this. Now, you've mentioned, Anna and Rachel, I'd be interested to hear this. You talked about these deals with people. So you've asked people, you ask what they want, and you do that. How often do you review that at the sort of individual? I realize you've done the big company one, because I do know some people who said, I've tried working at home, I've tried virtually, I want out, I want to go back. Yeah. So how often do you return to those conversations with people?
So from a PwC perspective, a lot. We use the people council I talked about. They meet every couple of months, and sometimes they drive the agenda, sometimes we do. But we take them, you know, very open questions. We will take feedback on things. We hear some things we don't like in those meetings, and we use that to continue to refine our office space, everything that sits within the deal. We continually evolve the deal, and we're continually listening to people, and we're piloting things, to Rob's point. So, you know, we don't launch something in 5-10 years ago, we probably would have created something that was absolutely perfect as far as we were concerned, launched it, you know, spent years creating something, and then realizing it probably wasn't perfect and having to update it and change it anyway. We're trying to be much more agile in the things that we do and just have a go. And, you know, we're not necessarily going to have all the data to tell us whether it's going to work or not. We're not necessarily going to have the perfect product, but we'll trial it, we'll have a go. So summer working hours was a really good example. We didn't spend years trying to put that policy into practice. We didn't go through every single consideration. We had a go. It worked incredibly well, but we also heard from some lines of service, we were really busy over the summer and we didn't manage to take it. You know, there were people that really struggled, and there was a real feeling of a sense of fairness. So this year we launched it again. We made some changes to the guidance and some of the stuff behind the scenes, but actually we launched it for 3 months, not 2, on the basis that the people that felt they couldn't do it, it gives them slightly longer to hopefully, you know, do it some of the time. We gave them plenty more warnings, so they got it in their diaries. We spoke to managers about it much sooner. So yeah, it didn't work perfectly the first time, and we've got plenty of other things in the pipeline that, you know, I genuinely think if it were 5 or 10 years ago, we would have waited and taken 2 years to launch them. And we are going to do it much more quickly, and there'll be some backlash and there'll be some stuff that doesn't work, but it does feel different. It
changes the backlash, doesn't it, when people know you're on a journey with them? You know, I think there's a lot more backlash when we were launching things as if they were perfect, because people will push back very quickly. Whereas, you know, COVID broke a lot of things and forced us into a lot of arenas where nobody had the answers. So I think that's helped. Can I build on that for everyone on the call? 2 things. How are we trying to ensure parity of opportunity for our people? And secondly, how are we helping people with boundaries? Because, you know, if we think about how people could become workaholics and really have damaging impact on their mental health, 24/7 screen time is a fast ticket to get there. So how do we do the boundaries, and how do we ensure that parity of opportunity for people?
I think quickly from me, I think on the boundaries piece, it comes back to the leadership role modeling and managers having those kind of regular conversations with their people and creating the culture where it's okay to talk about ways of working. It's not just okay, it's proactively encouraged. And within that, well-being being a really important part of that, and talking openly and you know, and really being open about your own well-being, you know, role modeling it. And I think that then on the impact of, you know, thinking about fairness and inclusion, I think with all of this kind of brilliant surveying and engagement that's going on, I think there are great opportunities to actually, and I'm sure, you know, many organizations are already doing this, I know that they are, but actually thinking about how is this impacting particular groups of people. You know, is there a disparate, you know, is there a negative impact on certain groups? And I know a lot of organizations have got kind of, you know, diversity and inclusion committees and that kind of stuff, but also just looking at the data, what's it telling you? How are people feeling? I don't know whether, you know, Anna at PwC, have you kind of got any any good tips of sort of the ways that you're looking out for this sort of stuff?
I was just thinking as you were talking, that first point on leadership role modelling, our Cats and Back Centre, who do a lot of research around culture, they talk a lot about symbolic acts. And actually, I don't know why I keep talking about summer working hours, but it's the one that springs to mind because I guess it's just finished. But we had a couple of, again, the first year, it was difficult and we didn't have full buy-in from the leadership. And there've been a couple of really nice examples that I've heard. One the first year, actually, which was a partner who he got invited to pitch on a Friday afternoon. And I think it was Wednesday or Thursday that they asked him to do it. And they wanted the whole team. They said, we want to meet the whole team who are going to do the work for us. And it was a massive client. And he went back and he said, no. He said, I'm prepared to come, but you get me, like you get the senior partner who, I'll be there some of the time, but I'm not going to be the person on the ground. If you want the team, it'll have to be next week.
Awesome. Fantastic.
And to me, that symbolic act, little things like that, and being able to share them across the organisation and say, we are taking this seriously and our leaders do role model this. It's that kind of thing that I think can help.
Much more powerful than pizza. It's much, much more powerful. And it is this thing, because I do think we are, if you're client facing, yes, the client rules, but you can take a client on a journey. And it is about it.
Oh, sorry, Debbie.
No, go ahead.
And I was going to say the best thing about that example is the client came back and said, fine, but you've missed the window and, sorry, you're not going to be able to pitch for it. And the first thing on Monday morning, they wrote back to him and said, actually, there's a slot for you. Can you come and do it this week?
Excellent.
So I think the assumption that we often make as a firm is actually if we push the boundaries and if we have those conversations, Rachel, to your point about ways of working, maybe they'll think we're being selfish, or maybe they'll think we're being, too inflexible. And actually, more often than not, people respect it and they respect those boundaries. And it's the same as an individual. If you, putting the time in your diary to drop your kids off at school or, whatever it might be, people do respect that. And as an individual, if you don't do it, nobody knows. So trying to license people to do it. And again, some of those symbolic acts and it coming from the top, I think that it does license people lower down, and gradually it starts to change behaviour everywhere.
I would add, because I've seen again in the organisation the examples, and I mean maybe you have in one of our communication channels you've got people giving their sort of what does flexible working mean to them, sort of thing, or their career story and things like this. And when that's coming from senior people and they're explaining how they're working differently and they're putting their outside work commitments together, throughout the week, and they are then empowering other people to say, we're all entitled to have a conversation with our line manager now about flexible working and actually and getting the right balance, sort of thing. So having these role models and little video moments when they come and explain how they're balancing things, I think that's very powerful.
I agree. So I'm mindful of people's time. I wanted to signal, because I promised you, Rachel, we are going to remind people a lot of what we've talked about here is hybrid in terms of remote and in-person working. What we want to think about for future sessions is that is only the tip of the iceberg of truly flexible working. Thinking about meaningful part-time work, that flexible start and finish, but let's tackle one problem at a time. Now I'm going to ask each of you, remember we have these actionable insights. So what we try and do in these sessions is, it's all very well, and I can be very excited on this call, and then 3 days later, it makes no sense at all. So if I'm throwing out to people on the call your advice of what they could do in 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months. So if I'm in the call, I'm a leader in my organization, what could I do in 3 days, in 3 weeks, and 3 months? Rachel, do you want to kick us off?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I think in 3 days, I would say reflect on your own kind of leadership shadow and how you're role modeling all of these great things that we've talked about in practice. So just a personal reflection and an action, a personal action of something you're going to do differently. I think in 3 weeks, it would be, if you're not already doing so, then really sort of have a conversation as a leadership team about all of this stuff, and starting to think really carefully about culture and about what comes next for you as an organisation. And 3 months, I would just reinforce that message about it's a test and learn. So keep asking the questions to your people, get that rich data, get that rich feedback, and reflect on it, and don't be afraid to change things.
Fantastic. Thank you. Robert, what do you think? What are your 3, 3, and 3?
Well, I didn't know this question was coming, so thanks. I just
and to everyone on the call,
yeah.
Robert was parachuted in this on the last minute, so we're going to let Robert. Let me let you give another minute. In fairness,
no.
Okay, no, he's ready.
Get it opened up. One thing I haven't mentioned, but what we mentioned, data, to be honest, and what we try to do is now to use data in a much more smarter way. We're trying to get to a stage where we can make evidence-based decisions, and that means data-led decisions. And so that to me is really powerful. And I would I would say to people, if you've got what do we tap into? Access control data, because people coming in and out of the office, because it tells us a wealth of things in terms of who's coming in, working patterns, where they're going in the building and stuff like this, and you can build up a real good picture. My other point would be in terms of pilot some ideas, pilot them, but if you do it in the spirit of experimentation, then you've got to accept there will be not everything's going to work, but you'll learn from it.
Good, thank you. And last, Anna.
Very similar to the other two, but I think 3 days, just start listening, ask some questions, get some insight. 3 weeks, I would start experimenting with things, just have a go, try some different things, and then 3 months I would iterate it. So to Rob's point about pilot, just start something, have a go, change it, update it, and see where you get to.
Fantastic. All right, everyone, I try and finish a few minutes early so that you can get a chance to get a cup of coffee and have a comfort break before your next meeting. Thank you so much for joining our Share and Learn session. Rachel, Robert, Anna, thank you so much for doing this. We love working with Timewise. We love working with PwC, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share these insights with you. We'll have you back again sometime soon to see where this leads us. Thank you, everyone. You'll get some follow-up to you. I highly recommend the Timewise report, and I hope you join us again for another session. Thank you.